Okay, we are good to go.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here with us this morning for this beautiful session. This is the fourth online meeting of our event, Applied Linguistics Q&A sessions. This event has been organized by Professor Rosane Silveira from the Federal University of Santa Catarina and myself, Professor Alisson Roberto Gonçalves from the Federal University of Paraná. This event is organized with the support of the graduate program in English from UFSC and the Núcleo de Assessoria Pedagógica and the Department of Modern Foreign Languages from UFPR. The topic of our event today are multiliteracies and second language practices. So prior to the session, our both guest lecturers were asked to prepare a presentation to discuss how critical education can be promoted with pedagogy of multiliteracies. I'm very pleased to receive today someone who's very dear to me, Professor Alessandra Coutinho Fernandes. She is a professor here at the Federal University of Paraná, and someone that I'm meeting for the first time, Professor Ana Paula Duboc from the University of São Paulo. So I'm very thrilled to have both of you in the session with us. During the session, during this event, you can submit your questions and comments on Zoom or through the chat on YouTube. Se você quiser, você também pode enviar perguntas em português, se você se sentir mais confortável, ok? Essas perguntas e comentários will be addressed later towards the end of the session. So before we start, I'd like to thank everyone for the participation, all the lecturers that will take part in the upcoming sessions, and of course, Alessandra and Ana Paula for their participation today. I also want to thank Rosane for the partnership in this event, and also Harissa, who has helped us put this together. In the session, we will have Professor Alessandra Coutinho Fernandes first, so I'll briefly introduce her, and then when Ana Paula speaks, I'll introduce Ana Paula, okay? So Professor Alessandra Coutinho Fernandes holds a PhD in Linguistic Studies from the Federal University of Paraná. She's a professor at the Department of Modern Foreign Languages at the same institution. Her research interests comprise multiliteracies, critical literacies, critical discourse analysis, and teacher education. I also would like to mention that she's the person who coordinates the Núcleo de Assessoria Pedagógica, who's promoting this event. So thank you very much for being here with us in this morning. I hope this session is very profitable for all of us. Okay, thank you very much. And now let's dive right into the session. Alessandra, you can open the mic now and do the screen sharing.
Are people, do people see me now?
They will now they see you, okay?
Okay. Hello, everyone. Listen, I'm very nervous here, okay? I promised myself I would not say this, but I have to tell you this in case I freak out, I lose track of what I have to say, but I have things to say, okay? So I'll do my best, okay, to go through this. And I'd like to thank Alison, I'd like to thank Rosane, and I'd like to thank Ana Paula, okay, for being with me here today in this session. I think it's very important to talk about multiliteracies, okay? And if I need help, I have organized with Alison, and he's going to help me out, okay? I'm going to share the screen now. Let me see. Let me see if I do everything correct as we discussed. Just a moment, people. Okay, present from current slide. All right, just a moment. Very nice. Alison, there is just a small problem. The windows are in front of the text.
You can move them, Ali. If you click on them with your mouse, you can move them.
Okay, right. Maybe this way is better. Maybe I'll have to change. So everyone, thank you for being here. Okay, let's get started. We have this very interesting prompt, which is, how can critical education be promoted with multiliteracies? Alison, it's not, just a moment. I'm clicking here, but it's not moving.
Are you clicking on your presentation no Explorer, or are you on Zoom?
Now, yes.
Okay.
Now, okay.
Good.
Okay. So how have I organized this presentation? Well, first I thought about discussing what I understand by critical and critical education. Then I'll make a few considerations on the pedagogy of multiliteracies. And finally, I'll give some examples of critical education through multiliteracies according to my practice here at UFPR. So how I understand the word critical, okay? Look here, we have this word cloud, and all these words, they help me understand what the word critical means to me. So in the middle, you see that critical means reading the word and reading the world. This is according to Paulo Freire. And for you to read the word in connection with the world, you are going to bring different dimensions. You are going to bring a personal dimension, a social dimension, a historical dimension, and very important, being critical is acknowledging that difference and dissent are part of our world. We cannot pretend they're not there. And it's exercising questioning. It's denaturalizing what's given to us as natural, as obvious, okay? And it's promoting agency and transformation. This is what critical means to me. What about critical education? Well, I understand that critical education is an education that understands that the world we live in is diverse. And we as educators, as critical educators, we have to open space for different opinions in class. And we have to understand, okay, as I said before, that conflict is part of the game. Okay, we cannot just pretend that dissent is not there, that difference is not there. We have to welcome respectfully, ethically, all these in our classes when we work with critical education. It also, critical education also involves getting students to connect with words, images, multimodal compositions, and the world. In Freire's time, okay, he talked about connecting the word and the world. But now we live in multimodal times, and we expand this idea. Critical education stimulates doubting and questioning, looking at what's represented in the news, in the media, with skeptical eyes, okay? Now, you're going to see that for me, the most important part comes now. Critical education gives students voice. So we have to have very clear in mind that our focus cannot only be the content, okay, an overload of content. Because if we work with an overload of content, we won't have time to listen to our students. We won't have time to have our students experience that content, dialogue with that content, okay? So giving students voice is, in my opinion, is very important when we are talking about critical education. And the most interesting thing about critical education is that it has to do with this last point there. It challenges our preconceived ideas. And because it challenges our preconceived ideas, it somehow changes us for the better, for the worse. I believe it's for the better, okay? But, and sooner or later, but this change is what makes us, in my opinion, more human. Okay, continuing. Here we have, okay, an image. This is a very well-known image of the New London group. You have here scholars, okay, from many different areas: critical discourse analysis, critical literacies, cultural studies, teacher education, okay, genre studies. And these people, these scholars, very famous, they met in 1994 to discuss about the future of literacies. In 1996, okay, we know that they published that very important first article, okay, the seminal article that introduced the concept of multiliteracies. And we are now in 2020, so it's 24 years later. And I would say that the concept of multiliteracies is more relevant than ever. We are here today anyway, and talking about multiliteracies, but most important in our Brazilian context, the concept of multiliteracies is in our Common Core curriculum, in our BNCC. And I think that we have to have resources to look at BNCC and see how the concept of multiliteracies is being portrayed there. Okay, so this is my objective here, helping you somehow get resources, okay? Have food for thought when you look at the way multiliteracies is presented at the BNCC. And you see, you have this image with lots of different colors of stones, different colors, different types, different sizes, different. BNCC is exerting a sort of force in the direction of sameness. But I think we cannot forget that we are all different. We have our specificities. That's why, before I move on to talk about the pedagogy of multiliteracies, I want you to stop for a while, each one of you that's listening to us now, and think about these questions. Who are you as a teacher? How have you been feeling during this pandemic? This is very important that you connect to your feelings, because maybe we are going to talk about technology, multimodality, and you simply can't hear anything related to computers or technology in this moment, okay? So what have you been learning during this pandemic? We are all learning, okay, at this time. Difficult lessons, important lessons, we are all learning. So what are your beliefs about education? This is very important, because no matter the theory, no matter the pedagogy you are going to bring to your practice, okay, this theory, this pedagogy, or these theories, these pedagogies, they have to be in connection with your beliefs about education. So what do you believe is your role as a teacher? Okay. What's the school where you teach like? sometimes we get too concerned about our present conditions. We look at our conditions and they seem so far from our ideal conditions that we don't, it's hard for us to conceive an education that's more active, that's more involving, that's more reflexive. But take your time. Maybe your conditions will change. Maybe once you change your conditions. Who are your students? What are their needs? What do you know about them, and what would you like to know about them? Remember when I said before giving students voice? How much voice have you given your students? So just some food for thought. Just to tell you, I'm going to talk about very briefly, I think, I'm going to talk about multiliteracies as ontology, epistemology, practice, and as a repertoire of practices. Okay. When we think about multiliteracies as ontology, we have this invitation to look at the world we live in, okay? And we see that this world, okay, is changing and changing fast because of globalization, because of mass migration, and because of digital technologies. We cannot look at these words as just lexicon. These words are part of our world, okay? And they are affecting us. Each one of them is affecting us in our locus of enunciation. And more, we've been having contact with people who come from different countries, who speak different languages, who have different cultures, different histories. We live in a world that is more socially and culturally diverse than ever. This is so much so that we who deal with languages, okay, we have been studying about translingualism, multilingualism, okay, in different levels, of course, depending on our research, on our main research. But all, okay, these areas of research, they are an attempt to respond to the world we live in, to this diverse world. And we cannot forget that one of the pillars of multiliteracies is exactly the multiplicity of cultures. Okay, multiliteracies does not only have to do with multimodal genres. So all this discussion about translingualism, multilingualism, they somehow connect with the studies of multiliteracies. And we have to think that our world is also a world marked by social and economic inequalities, by discrimination of all sorts. So I ask you, what is the role of education? I'm not going to answer, okay? There is no simple answer. It's for us to think. But what is the role of education? And when we consider multiliteracies as ontology, how does this conception, how can this conception affect our practice? Multiliteracies as epistemology makes us question traditional views of teaching and learning. How do students learn? Is it by silently consuming what we tell them? Is it by memorizing what we teach them so that they can get good grades in tests? To what extent does a traditional pedagogy help students live, learn, work, take a stand, relate to other people in our contemporary world? Okay, so I think from the questions you can already guess that we need to do better than that. Okay, so it also, okay, understanding multiliteracies as epistemology also means understanding that students learn when they do things with what they're learning. So learning is not just a question of memorizing. It's not just cognitive work, okay? According to the pedagogy of multiliteracies, students have to do things, okay? They have to get involved with what they are studying. But in order for them to do this, we need to think about our curriculum and the amount of content, okay, it has. And as a final point, okay, just for this list, multiliteracies as epistemology suggests that the walls that separate the world outside school and what happens within school should be blurred. So this is a moment when we start considering if students can really profit for our diverse world from a curriculum that's based only on the canon, okay? What else would we need to bring, okay, into our teaching and learning experiences? Multiliteracies as practices, okay? So I would say that many people mainly focus on multiliteracies as practices. For example, many people focus on this on the right side of this slide, on producing videos, on taking and analyzing photographs, producing graphic novels, all these multimodal genres, which of course are very important to be worked with in class. But multiliteracies as practice also has to do with epistemic movements, okay? And Cope and Calensis have reworked, okay, the first epistemic movements they proposed along with the New London group. And now we have actions, movements towards learning in the area of applying, in the area of analyzing, in the area of experiencing, in the area of conceptualizing. When you look at these epistemic movements, when you are preparing your lessons, you may get to observe if you are, okay, where you put your lens on more often. Okay, maybe you should expand, maybe you should try different routes. There is no sequence here, okay? So this is multiliteracies as practices. So ontology, epistemology, okay, and practices. Recently, I bought this book by Einstein and Bull, and they bring this multiliteracies as a repertoire of practices. And look at what's involved here. Learning how to, okay, what would be one of these practices? Learning how to deal with the range of literacies that have evolved as a consequence of globalization, social and cultural diversity, and technology. So learning, okay, to deal with these different literacies, engaging with traditional and new texts and technologies. We are not going to forget about traditional texts or the canon, okay, or traditional technologies. Okay, we are always summing up. Another practice has to do with becoming critical literate and actively constructing meaning. And of course, exercising different roles from the very basic code breaker, okay, to meaning maker, text user, text analyst. This is also used in critical literacies. I bring here some points to ponder. Okay, this could be the end, but I already bring them here. Contributing to make students multiliterate, in my opinion, involves more than simply requesting them to produce multimodal genres. I have seen some practices of traditional teaching, and in the end, the teacher comes and asks students to produce a cartoon or to produce a poem or to produce a drawing to illustrate their learning. But there was no discussion in class about exactly the second point we have here, the languages of other modes, the languages of images, the languages of movies, the languages of platforms, okay? We need to discuss this so that our students can use these resources to make their own meanings. But they need to know that there are different resources associated with different modes. It takes time, and we should not get anxious about this, okay? We can go a step at a time, okay? But I think it's not enough just to say, okay, now you produce a video, or now you make a drawing, or produce a graphic novel without analyzing, okay, the resources they would have available. Being multiliterate implies thinking about issues like why, to whom, how, in terms of which modes, in what circumstances, what for. Okay, you are going to think about all this when deciding how to produce meaning. We already thought about this when we dealt, okay, like decades ago, only with the written text. But now this gets, we expand this, okay? This gets bigger because we have other options we can count on. It has to do being multiliterate has to do with getting students to think, that's what I said, to think about the affordances and limitations of meaning production across different modes. I always give the example of, what's the name of the movie? Inside Out, if I'm not mistaken. And you have the description of anguish, okay? You have the description of a total blackout, but this is not verbally exposed. This is imagetically constructed, because maybe it would be too hard to put those ideas into words for kids. And then kids get the picture through the representation through images. And we see this all the time. Multiliteracies has to do with giving students voice and choice. It has to do with looking at diversity as something positive. It has to do with understanding that not all students need to be on the same page at the same time. And how do you get students not to be on the same page on the same time? By considering the possibility of organizing different tasks students can do simultaneously in class, in groups, okay, that you are going to organize according to different criteria. Well, these are just some ideas I would like you to consider. Now I'm going to show you some projects I have been developing with my students. Let me just ask Alison, how much time do I have?
As much as you like.
Okay, I won't take long. So let me show you some projects I have been developing with my students. Just for you to know, I have been basically developing projects using images, photographs, and using videos, okay? And I always, this is in general, so photographs and videos. And I also ask my students to connect and expand what they are studying in class, okay, in these projects, so that they learn not only about what we are discussing in class in terms of content by adding their world, okay, but they also learn about technologies and about meaning making and all this. At least I try. And I also try to connect, to think about themes related to what's happening in our society at that specific semester. So let's see one example here. You have here, remember that the epistemic movements, the circle I showed before, this is just to illustrate how I have used these moves in my projects. For example, experiencing the known. Okay, so they work with the subject of our classes. Okay, in this case, my course was about critical literacy. Then experiencing the new, expanding and correlating what we have studied in class with their own areas of interest. They are going to make the connections they want. They need to read that content, that theoretical content we discuss in class in relation to their world. Okay? This is the exercise. This is what we try to practice. And then I understand that, for example, although I don't believe in digital natives, I understand that this generation is more acquainted with technologies, but still they need to use technology for different purposes. Talking with my students, I have heard very frequently that they use their cell phones to use social media, to take pictures, to make videos, use TikTok, okay, to interact, to have fun, but not exactly to think about those devices as tools for them to improve, for them to use in the educational area. Okay, for their students to learn more, for them to learn more. And I try to help them get more comfortable with these uses of technology. Conceptualizing in terms of theory, of course, because when we are in terms of naming, okay, meta-language, of course, because when we are dealing with critical literacies, lots of terms appear that they have to experience. For example, Alan Luke brings constructive skepticism, representation, and then we have the ideologies, mode of operation. So this cannot just be words. They have to understand this in context. They have to think of examples. They have to identify. I say they have to, but I mean they need to, okay? At the same time, there is the specific language of video production, video editing, okay, that you end up developing. And conceptualizing by theorizing, then you are going to have the background for the videos, okay, the theoretical background for the videos. Analyzing, of course, they are going to analyze, and this is all together actually. If you okay, there is no way for them to first experience, then apply, then analyze. This all comes a little bit together. But analyzing functionally in order to decide what to approach in their videos, what to say, what to show, what effects to use to convey their message. I have received feedback from my students that they have never, most of them actually, not all of them, but most of them had never edited videos before these projects. So they had to learn basically from scratch, many of them, every little detail from inserting lettering, inserting images, having voiceover, all these details, all these strategies, resources they can use. And how did they learn this? Did I teach them this? They learned this by talking to one another, by sharing knowledge among themselves, okay, by watching YouTube videos and tutorials, and they did a great job, incredible. In terms of analyzing critically, the videos had to respond, okay, to our content from a critical perspective. They had to look at things, okay, of their interest from a critical perspective. This was the exercise. And the question of applying, okay, you have there, on one hand, their videos had to respond to the discussions we had in class. I mentioned this before. And on the other hand, they had to learn how to use their phones to record and then edit the videos. And applying creatively, they had total freedom to choose the topics of their work and to choose the resources they would use. And it was very funny that they started comparing and saying very nice things to one another about their videos. It was very beautiful. So look at this. I have some print screens here from some of my students' videos. So you have this first video that questions about, that calls attention to the importance of questioning, to the importance of looking at, to understanding representation from the perspective of someone's context, someone's previous experiences, someone's prejudice. All this was involved. Danielle talked about how the mode of ideology called legitimation is part of important documents, okay, such as the Constitution and other documents, in which you legitimate representations, making people believe that they are an expression of the truth. So he discussed this. There was this discussion about using Chimamanda's video, The Danger of a Single Story, and how the danger of a single story is connected to limited representations and how we need to go beyond these single stories, the single stories we get to hear in our everyday life. The importance, then we have the importance of developing different reading practices to read this complex world we live in. And the last one was very interesting because this student was talking about the acceleration of the representation of the acceleration of time. And look at the mood she created. She spoke slowly, in a quiet voice. And the place was also very quiet. The light was dim. And while she used this ambience, let's say, she brought different perspectives about time, perspectives that are non-Western. So it was very, very nice. I liked it a lot. There was this, again, I'm going to stop. Alison, you really can stop me, okay? Or say, Alessandra, you have 5 minutes. But I'm almost there. So in terms of reading images, okay, we use these 3 levels based on Jenks in class, okay? Like reading the content, okay, of the image, what we can see, what we cannot see, analyzing how this content is represented in terms of shots, angles, lighting, color, eye contact, all these details and other ones. And finally, okay, how is the image used? Okay, bringing that image and reading it in context. Okay, in a political context, social context, and so on. So in class, we worked with these images for them to, this was last year, the first semester of last year, okay? So we had all these attacks in terms of what we produce, of the kind of knowledge we produce at universities. So I made this composition of our balbúrdias, okay? And much on the contrary, we have there lots of very important research very serious contribution we offer society, okay, from our public universities. Violence, we also discussed violence against Black people, against women, women exploitation, and of course, ele não, okay? And after we discussed all this, okay, they produced their videos about an image of their choice. And you see that there was this image that investigated this cover. Look at the title, Guns in the Brazilian Family. But then she analyzed what kind of family is portrayed in this cover. Okay, whose values seem to be represented on this cover? And then all of them, actually, they worked with those three levels. They described, they looked at representation, and they brought the discussion to our context. Okay, so we have this other one, Who Gets to Be American, okay? That cover of Time magazine was published in 2018 under Trump's migration rules, okay? Then we have this beautiful analysis on the cover of Vogue, portraying Beyoncé as a powerful Black woman, and she described very well in her video how this power is constructed imagetically. We have this discussion here in the middle, okay, with this Oreo biscuit and its different layers of meaning, okay, and how we read this pride in relation to what we read this pride. We also had this video on how violence gets into poor communities, neighborhoods, and touch kids' lives at a very early point. Okay, and then when later we come to talk about, oh, everybody has this equal rights, everybody has equal opportunities. It's just a question of doing your best. Okay, we have to really put this into perspective. Okay, so this was another project, Moving On with Hope, I called it. So it was developed with other group of students in this in a context of government attacks against public universities. Let me see. Let me take this. Okay, get pictures to connect with your experience at UFPR. Okay, so we have, it was, all these pictures were taken during during that period in which we had lots of demonstrations against the cuts, the financial cuts, okay, that were being established for public universities. The students were very anxious about all that. And these are their pictures, okay? So you have here, O Conhecimento Destrói Mitos, Em Defesa da Educação. So what is UFPR for them? This was a project in which they reconnected with the way they identify with the public university where they study, okay? This image here in the middle, okay, was said to portray not only the power, but the resistance, okay, we have to impose to all this, that's, okay, all these forces that are coming from different directions. So this one was very interesting because it was like, UFPR for me is a myriad of voices, of purposes, of dialogues, okay, and we see UFPR fighting again against myth, UFPR as a strong institution that will survive, UFPR as a place of communion, as a place of dialogue. This is how those group of students represented through images, and then we discussed in class later each one of these images. Okay, a last one I'm going to, this was a collage, okay. I asked my students to produce a series of pictures that to answer this question, what does UFPR mean to you? These were first year students, and I wanted them, this was also in, this was 2018, actually. And I wanted them to, the discourse of Escola Sem Partido was very, very strong at that moment. And I asked them to answer this question with pictures. They could not use words of their own at this moment. So they produced collage, pieces of collage like these ones. And they came to class, they projected this, their collage, and their colleagues would try to interpret through the images they chose how they felt, what UFPR meant for them, okay? And it was very interesting because at the first moment they couldn't say anything, okay? They just had to listen to, okay, interpretations, different interpretations of their pieces of work. And after that, they produced a video. I don't have the video here, but they produced a video in which they explained, okay, to their colleagues, their interpretation of the pictures, if there was a sequence or not, what concepts they tried to portray through images, and all this was, then they had, okay, a chance to give their interpretation. It was very interesting because then they could see how, okay, what might be very clear for them is not, okay, is reinterpreted in different ways, and it is still very valid. This is, I'm not going to show this one. And to finish, let me see if I can relocate this here. Yes. In sum, multiliteracies help promoting critical education when students have a space to bring their world into the classroom, when they work collaboratively and have to negotiate meanings, when they have a chance to learn from each other's productive diversity, when they become more comfortable with the affordances of different meaning-making resources, when they learn to develop a skeptical attitude towards how the world is multimodally represented in the media. And I say, these are just some points, okay, that I brought to you now, but you can go on with this list. Just a moment. Okay. And my thank you, people. You have this image of our turbulent times. We are amid a pandemic. We are having to deal with lots of difficulties we had never even imagined. But I do want to finish with Freire's idea of keeping hope up. And hope for Freire is not waiting. Hope for Freire is standing up, going after, building, not giving up, okay? Getting together with people to do things in a different way. Thank you very much, people, okay? That's it. There are the references later. Okay, yes. Oh, I should stop sharing my screen. Okay.
Thank you very much, Alessandra. It was a lovely and very inspiring presentation. There are many comments here on Zoom and also on YouTube of people congratulating you and saying how inspiring you are, and also some questions, okay? We will go through these questions later on, so thank you so much. Now, we will move on to our second speaker of today, Professor Ana Paula Duboc. I'll quickly introduce her, and then she will have the floor. So, Ana Paula Duboc holds a PhD in English Language Studies from the University of São Paulo. She's a professor of language teaching methodology at the School of Education at the same university in both graduate and undergraduate programs. She's interested in English language teaching, language and educational policies, teacher education, critical literacies, and the relationship between language and decoloniality. So thank you very much, Professor Ana Paula, for being here with us. And I'll spotlight your video now, and I'll ask you to open your mic, and then the floor is all yours.
Okay, good morning. Can you hear me well? Well, first of all, yes. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Alison and Rosani, for inviting me for this talk. It's a pleasure to be part of this set of insightful sections that you've been organizing in the last couple of weeks. It's also an honor to share this time with my beloved colleague, Alessandra, whose work I admire a lot. And the talk was very inspiring. I thank you for that as well. Well, I'm gonna share my screen now because I also have some slides to show. Is it working? Yes?
Yes, Ana Paula, it is perfect.
Okay. So whenever I get an invitation for a talk, I immediately asked the person who invited me what the topic is about. And then I questioned myself whether I have something to say that might contribute to mutual knowledge production. And when I got Alison's email, I immediately scrolled down the message to find out the topic of this section. And I realized that I was supposed to answer to the question, how can we promote critical education with multiliteracies? At first, I thought, well, I don't have an answer. But then the invitation, along with this very intriguing question, placed myself in a self-reflective moment and made me reframe and actually restate my first impression. I do have an answer, although this answer might not look like an answer, as I wish to respond to this question with a different question. But before doing so, I just selected 3 scenes that, to my mind, are quite insightful to better understand the argument that I want to pose today and share with you. Well, the first scene is actually a description by Paulo Freire from his book, A Importância do Ato de Ler, in which he describes how he, as a child, learned how to read and write. And then he states, fui alfabetizado no chão do quintal da minha casa, à sombra das mangueiras, com palavras do meu mundo e não do mundo maior dos meus pais. O chão foi meu quadro negro, gravetos, o meu giz. The second scene is also a literacy event involving another child, this time Valentina, my 5-year-old daughter. In one of her literacy events at night, she grabbed this book, her favorite one, Berimbau e Outros Poemas, selection by the poems are written by Manuel Bandeira, but the selection was by Elias José, and with beautiful drawings by Graça Lima. So she grabs her book, and then let me see. And then she reads poetry to me.
Quando eu tinha 6 anos, me dava porquinho da Índia. Que dor de coração me dava, que o bichinho só queria estar debaixo do fogão. Levar ele pra sala, pros lugares mais bonitos que eu achava. Ele não gostava. Ele sempre quis ficar debaixo do fogão. Ele foi minha primeira namorada.
Okay, I don't know if the volume was of good quality for you, but and the third one is a scene that I retrieve from a discussion by Menezes de Souza in relation to Kaxinawa writing, a kind of writing that is strongly marked by a combination of alphabetic writing system, geometrical patterns, along with mono and multicolored visual elements. And this is a print that I retrieved from this beautiful text by Limário. So my question is, why is that I selected these 3 scenes? And how far are they related to the word, to the term, to the concept of multiliteracies? In other words, by the time you were visualizing and getting in contact with my selected scenes, what connections have you made in your mind with those 3 scenes and the notion of multiliteracies? And most importantly, how do they help me respond the question that was posed to me? So to me, all scenes do share a common ground, as the 3 of them displays different meaning-making processes that are highly and richly marked by multimodal and multisensorial aspects. However, and this is important for my argument, I do have the impression that one might not associate, at least at a first sight, the 3 scenes with the concept of multiliteracies. And where does my assumption come from? A quick search on Google unveils, or might unveil, an imaginary of multiliteracies that nowadays is strongly associated with digital technologies, as if the notion of multiliteracies would necessarily rely on them, as if multiliteracies and digital technologies would become kind of synonyms. So whenever if you type the word multiliteramentos on Google Images, odds are that you will find out visual representations such as this one that I selected to you, in which multiliteracies is immediately associated with digital technologies. And in this respect, it's worth to recall the very word as it is coined back in the 90s by the New London Group in their seminal collective manifesto. And they themselves explained why is that they came up with this term, unveiling the prefix multi in a 2-folded meaning. And here I quote Copen Calantzis: "We decided that the outcomes of our discussions could be encapsulated in one word, multiliteracies, a word we chose because it describes 2 important arguments we might have with emerging cultural, institutional, and global order. The first argument engages with the multiplicity of communications channels and media. The second, with increasing salience of cultural and linguistic diversity." So as one can see, multiliteracies in digital technologies do have a strong relation, as the same authors state. There is this increasing multiplicity and integration of significant modes of meaning making, where the textual is also related to the visual, the audio, then spatial, and the behavior, and so on. However, this is not simply one of the facets within the multiliteracies. But this facet, to me, seemed to be privileged to the detriment of the very other facet that the prefix accounts, which has to do with local diversity and heterogeneous meaning-making processes carried out in different cultural and social realities. So why is it that a kind of metonymical understanding around multiliteracies have commonly taken part as a whole, echoing a true but incomplete view of the phenomenon? Regardless of digital technologies, I guess that today more than ever, it's important for us to retrieve this idea that human communication is driven by multimodality. Consequently, if multimodality is socially driven and turns to be a key element to the notion of multiliteracies, then multiliteracies is a social phenomenon. And apparently, this argument seems quite simple and quite obvious. However, as words don't carry fixed meanings and are culturally, ideologically, and politically driven, it seems to me that this very simple and obvious notion of multiliteracies as a social phenomenon has somehow been blurred or neglected or sidestepped in recent years, giving room for understandings that need to be put under critical scrutiny. And that leads to my main argument today that I want to share with you. I'm here favoring a reclaiming for multiliteracies as a social phenomenon. And if we assume that multiliteracies is a social phenomenon, then two important premises come to my mind and are to be addressed. One, multiliteracies is old stuff, and two, multiliteracies is not necessarily digital stuff. And I would like to say a few words on each of them. With regards to the notion that multiliteracies is old stuff, the scene concerning Kaxinawa multimodal writing proves the argument well. According to Limario, Western logocentricity neglected the very complex and kinesthetic meaning-making processes in which emotions, gestures, taste, touch, smell, the visual and the audio are put aside. The divide between the oral and the written in Western logocentric society is questioned by the acknowledgement of Kaxinawa's heterogeneous semiotic interactions. So logocentric lenses tend to read Kaxinawa writing as deficient. However, their kinesthetics in meaning-making process, the multimodality, so to speak, which is older, much older than the coined term multiliteracies, carry a very complex cultural practice. That being said, if multiliteracies is old stuff, then my talk today is an invitation to detach the concept from a particular scholarship, preventing the term from academic branding. As for the second premise, that multiliteracies is not necessarily digital stuff, I seek support in the other two scenes, the scenes that present two children, the young Freire and my Valentina, in their personal literacy practices, which are of a multiliterate kind. The very Freirean concept of alphabetization, despite the fact that Freire never used the word multiliterous, as it was coined by the New London Group, but his notion of alphabetization back in the 60s would encompass already the idea that learning to read and write is highly affected by what one possesses at hand in relation to material resources and also values. In such process, it's important also for us to retrieve Freire's notion of incompleteness of man, o ser como ser inacabado, which is interestingly and coherently orchestrated with his idea of wholeness, or inteireza do ser, in his attempt to break with the divide between reason and emotion, body and mind. It's also Freire who stated, sou uma inteireza e não uma dicotomia. Conheço com meu corpo todo, sentimentos, paixão, razão também. So as one can see, multiliteracies is out there, inbuilt in Freire's own understanding of the humankind and the very literacy practices one is involved. Surrounded by the smell of mangoes, the texture of the stick in his hands, the sound of the stick scratching the ground, the young Freire experiences a multiliterate practice. Likewise, Valentina, my daughter, reads the poem by activating a complex variety of multiple literacies built over our poetry reading bedtime. And while part of these semiotic modes are explicitly displayed at the book, in this case, the verbal and the visual representations coexisting in both pages, what turns to be essential, and this is important, what turns to be essential in her meaning-making processes is a very particular multisensorial experience which is invisible to an observer. As her mother, I easily recognize the echoing of my voice in her own way of pronouncing the sounds, and most importantly, how my way of looking at her by the time I read poetry to her, cuddling her and smiling at her during our poetry reading time, bedtime moments, impacts her own way with words. Such highly emotional, bodily, tactile, visual, and audio experience between us has nothing to do with digitality. Still, it is pure multiliteracies. So in both scenes, it seems to me that the body matters. So we have to get back to the body whenever we talk about multiliteracies. The situated body matters. And here I recall a quote by Leander and Baudet in which they say, it is in the body that we locate the affective sensations of those registrations that are available to our consciousness, often making meaning of them by giving them form and significance as emotion, physical sensation, response, or energy. That being said, if multiliteracies is not necessarily digital stuff, then my talk today is an invitation to detach the concept from a kind of superimposition of the digital technologies over the social and affective multiliterate dimension. Well, the two premises that I present today would, in my opinion, be a precondition to the reclaiming of multiliteracies as a social phenomenon. And in this respect, I myself have published stuff in which I strongly have approached the notion of multiliteracies to the digital realm and to a particular scholarship. However, my recent decolonial readings as a researcher, along with my personal multisensorial experiences with my daughter, especially now that we are isolated in our homes during the pandemic, have led somehow myself towards what I will call here a proposal towards delinking multiliteracies. The concept of delinquing is brought by Mignolo and is related to his discussion on the geo-body politics of knowledge. What Mignolo proposes is a shift in the geography of reason through the questioning of who generates knowledge and where knowledge is generated. And in doing so, strategically speaking, the author proposes what he calls epistemic disobedience. That is to say, the exercise of making noise in the well-established modes of knowing, followed by the exercise of delinking, that is related to the exercise in which we detach ourselves from the ties of Western-based ideas. So I borrow Mignolo's concept of delinking or desprendimento to propose delinking multiliteracies in two ways. One of an epistemic nature would refer to this need, as I said previously, to detach the concept from a particular branding and particular scholarship. And the other one is of a digital kind, which refers to the need to detach the concept from this somehow subjection to the digital stuff, in which the pun inbuilt in delinking is an invitation towards less clicks on the billions of links made available in the web. Reclaiming the notion of multiliteracies as a social phenomenon, as I am proposing today, through this epistemic and digital delinking, might actually sound paradoxical in times when online learning is brought to the fore because of the pandemic. However, as body matters and unequal economic and social conditions provide families with very distinct affordances, some of which not even closer to the digital type, wouldn't be the case for us to change the terms of the conversations whenever we talk about multiliteracies. These are some of my recent reflections, and I would really like to hear from you anytime. As I prepared this talk, I cannot stop thinking that thousands of teachers, students, and families are struggling to adapt to this new reality. And which reality? Out of many, I address two big types. And here I'm gonna read a quote by myself, which is about to be published in a new text in a special edition issue. De lado, crianças abastadas, de classe média e classe alta, tornam-se o estorvo dos pais agora em home office, sem tempo para se dedicar aos míseros 5 minutos de esconde-esconde nos suntuosos metros quadrados de casas e apartamentos, porque time is money. Não demora muito e escolas, sobretudo as privadas, pressionadas por pais pagantes, começam finalmente a preparar atividade para justificar a manutenção das mensalidades. O neoliberalismo autoritário, ávido por sujeitos eficazes, produtivos e competitivos, pressiona o pai, que pressiona a escola, que pressiona o professor, que pressiona o enter, o send, o play, querendo, no fundo, pressionar a ESC ou delete. De outro, crianças menos abastadas, desprovidas de quase tudo, são estorvo de pais nervosos que ou acabaram de perder seu ganha-pão com o agravamento da economia informal, ou estão sob o risco de perder seu emprego. O neoliberalismo autoritário, afeito à concentração de renda, aos lucros bancários e à precarização do trabalho, pressiona o empregado que não pressiona o seu empregador, e se pressiona, faz cócegas no sistema mundo capitalista. So by favoring this simplest concept of multiliteracies as a social phenomenon, I propose an epistemic and digital delinking of the term as precondition to bring contextual and situated bodies to the fore, along with the need to acknowledge their surrounding multimodal and multisensorial experiences. As for my answer to the question, how can we promote critical education with multiliteracies? As I have attempted to change the terms of the conversation today, all I have left is to respond with a different question. How can we possibly think of critical education without multiliteracies, as it is old stuff, as it does not rely on digital stuff? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ana.
My pleasure.
It was a pleasure to hear from you. It was a striking presentation, right? We weren't prepared for that end, I must confess. So I'll move now to this last part of our session. I'm still recomposing from Ana's question, okay? So I'll go to the questions that the audience has posed throughout both presentations. During Alessandra's, when she firstly presented, and then to questions that are addressed to Professor Ana Paula as well, okay? So let me open here my file. Alessandra.
All right.
Okay, Ana, I think you can open your mic as well if you feel comfortable, because maybe there are questions here that might be addressed to the both of you. So you both might dialogue and might elaborate together for some answers, for some reflections to these questions, okay? So I will begin, Alessandra, with a question that it's actually from myself.
Oh my gosh.
When you were presenting in your initial slides, you mentioned content as you were talking about multiliteracies. And then it strikes me that content, when we are talking about multiliteracies, might be something else from this understanding that we have of what content is. I think that when we think about multiliteracies, maybe the notion of content needs to be re-examined, because sometimes content is a synonym for the linguistic component of the class. And when we're talking about multiliteracies, we are reframing what content is. So considering that we have students here in the session, literacy students here in the session, Ali, how do you think that we can make this clear? How do you think that we can make this reconception of content clear in our classroom practices?
Alison and everyone, let me go back to how I think I used content. Okay, maybe I didn't express myself as I wanted to. But when I talked about content, what I had in mind was this amount of items in a syllabus, okay, that schools have in mind they have to focus on. And what happens? Because of this very tight syllabus, it's today students are learning A, tomorrow they are learning B, the day after tomorrow they are learning C. So it's a sequence of subject matters, it's a sequence of information. And in order to, and everything is interconnected, because in order for teachers to be able to, to convey the content they are expected to, they end up adopting a transmissive pedagogy. Okay, they speak all the time, they write on the board, and this pedagogy reproduces a kind of education that, in my opinion, needs to be changed, deeply changed, because if the focus is on content, then the focus will not be on making students active learners. We need a space in the curriculum to make students active learners. Okay, they need to have practice in which they discuss, they how can I say, for example, if they have to talk about their weekend, whatever, okay, something that happened, how are they going to do this? Okay, are they simply going to write? Are they simply going to speak? What are all other resources that they can use? Okay, but they need to have time for this. That's what I wanted to call attention to. They need to have time to interact, to experience with different modes, to try different ways of expressing themselves, to connecting what they are learning with what they knew or would like to know. So it's in this sense. Have I answered?
Yes, you did. Thank you so much. Ana, would you like to comment?
Well, actually, I see that when it comes to multiliteracies, multimodality is a fundamental concept, and the available designs, or the resources, so to speak, come to our mind. Today I would like to really call the attention for those resources that are not made available online. As my talk today wants to bring the body back to the scene, back to the picture, back to the fore. The body as this great and powerful and potent resource that we own. So actually, my answer would get back to my recent reflections. Whenever we talk about those available designs and resources, I would like to look at those bodies, the situated bodies, as actually within the notion of sociology of emergency and not absence. They make meanings are made possible whenever we have what we have at hand in terms of resources, the bodies and the values. So I don't know actually if I've answered the question as the way it is posed. To me, tends to relate to the available designs that is discussed in a pedagogy of multiliteracies, for instance. And I don't know if you agree, Alessandra, or you would like to complement.
Totally. And in fact, when we talk about these resources, they are a great source of anxiety for teachers, okay? Because then teachers get really concerned about how much they have to know about different resources. For example, I was talking about languages. Okay, the language of visual images, the language of moving images, the language of apps. And then the teacher might go like, oh my gosh, I don't have time to learn all these languages. Okay, I don't have time to learn all these resources. But the point is, it's a question of balancing agency. The teacher doesn't have to do this all by themselves. Okay, students can play a very important role in getting acquainted with this resource, in teaching one another, in looking for information for these resources. So I totally agree with you, Ana Paula, mainly when you speak about the body. okay, which is a great point you brought in your presentation.
Ana, durante a sua apresentação, eu entendi que você propõe essa corporeificação do conceito de multiletramento, né? Da gente olhar para os multiletramentos novamente com a relação que eles têm com o nosso corpo. E o tempo todo eu estava pensando nisso em relação às emoções que a gente tem, porque eu estudei, eu recebi uma educação em que não existia espaço para as emoções. Então, assim, é como se a sala de aula fosse detached de tudo aquilo que a gente sente, né? E aí eu estava pensando, como que a gente pode, né, essa é a minha pergunta para refletir, para nós refletirmos, como que a gente pode, então, como formadores de professores, como que a gente pode estabelecer práticas na sala de aula em que a gente vai conseguir corporeificar isso, todas essas práticas novamente, entendendo que houve um movimento em que tudo foi digitalizado, ao mesmo tempo que a gente vai corporeificar as práticas, como é que a gente vai entender a emoção nesses nossos movimentos? E eu não consegui pensar nisso em inglês, por isso que eu fiz a pergunta em português. Okay.
Tranquilo.
Eu respondo em português também?
Fica à vontade.
Tá. Sim, eu acho que um ponto super importante nessa reflexão que eu trouxe hoje, compartilhei com vocês aqui, é que ela não se estabelece numa lógica de ou isso ou aquilo, mas sim uma lógica de e isso e aquilo. Então, quando eu digo que o conceito de multiletramentos tem que se desvincular das novas tecnologias, ele não vai deixar de se relacionar a elas, porque é parte dela, mas ele não pode mais ser necessariamente relacionado às novas tecnologias. E como a questão do corpo importa muito para o pensamento decolonial, e a minha aproximação foi justamente, né, como é que o pensamento decolonial pode nos ajudar a mudar os termos da conversa do que hoje se fala de multiletramentos, é justamente para chamar a atenção do quanto que aquela representação visual no livro Multiliteracies de 2000, que é aquela onde há um círculo com diferentes modos semióticos, como que aquilo é muito antigo, muito, enfim, precede quando o termo foi cunhado, e como é que o corpo sempre foi multissensorial, multimodal. Daí a necessidade da gente trazer o corpo para a ação de novo, né? Em termos práticos para a sala de aula, isso pode ser bastante significativo e pode, de fato, mudar os termos da conversa, na medida em que você, ao trazer, por exemplo, a questão afetiva, emocional, tátil, gestual, você acaba rompendo com o logocentrismo, você acaba rompendo com a razão, com a racionalidade, o que pode ser fundamental para a gente poder, inclusive, acessar certas dificuldades, certos desafios que a gente está tendo hoje e que, por meio de uma explicação metalinguística, metacognitiva, a gente está fracassando, a gente não está dando conta. Então, a minha ideia é, na verdade, reconhecer que há multimodalidade e que há práticas multiletradas, independentemente de novas tecnologias. E talvez seja o caso do professor, não só professor de línguas, mas professor enfim, que atua em diferentes áreas de conhecimento, que olhe para essa multissensorialidade que pulsa na sala de aula e que efeitos ela faz surgir na relação do eu e do outro naquela sala de aula. Eu acho que isso pode ser um caminho muito interessante para a gente poder resgatar. Não sei, Alice, se respondi a sua questão.
Respondeu perfeitamente, Ana. Muito obrigado. Ale, você gostaria de comentar também?
Eu gostaria.
Eu achei a resposta da Ana fantástica, certo? Eu acho que essa ideia de não é ou isso ou aquilo é a base de tudo. E, digamos, onde nós vamos entre isso e aquilo é construído com os alunos, é construído com quem são nossos alunos, com quais são os interesses deles. E uma coisa sobre o corpo, né? Eu gostaria que me toca também, é que o corpo tem história e o corpo tem memória, não é? Então, se a gente pensa hoje nos migrantes, que histórias, que memórias, que culturas esses corpos trazem e começam a se misturar com os corpos, né, de brasileiros, e que estranhamento isso causa, e que letramento de inclusão nós precisamos adotar nas escolas a partir desses corpos tão diversos, né? Então, era basicamente isso que eu gostaria de dizer.
Eu não estou sendo um bom moderador because I forgot to retrieve the questions from the chat as I was paying attention to what was being discussed here. So there's a question here by Camila House. I think it's for Alessandra, and I'll ask Rosane's help with the questions on the chat. On YouTube, because there are many questions there that I couldn't read because I was paying attention to Alessandra and Ana Paula, okay? So, Alessandra, Camila House.
Alison, just a moment. There is a line in the middle of the screen saying the whole has spotlighted your video for it. Is that okay?
It's okay. It's when you are the only one shown.
Oh my
okay. So, Camila House asked you, Alessandra, how do you deal with students who bring expectations of a more traditional approach in class? What if, when you give them choice, they opt for exclusively linguistic content, for example?
Camila, the answer to this question is very funny because teaching at UFPR, I always say and repeat, and my students know this, the impression I have is that I have the best students ever, okay? I'm very privileged in this sense because my students, from what I remember, they are very open to new practices. And they are very mature, very critical, okay, already, and they want more. So I haven't faced at UFPR, okay, yet, not that I remember, I'm sorry, but a situation in which a student comes and asks for pure linguistic content. Of course, all these projects that I develop with videos and images, they are difficult for them, okay? Mainly the ones with videos. Sometimes they tell me that they can't see themselves on camera. They record 5-6 times, but in the end, they like what they came to produce. In the end, they think they learned something that might be useful for them as teachers, and even for their personal lives, okay? So my students so far have been very open to experiencing new practices, which does not mean that they think they are easy, okay?
Thank you so much, Ali. Ana, Daniel e a Clarissa estão numa discussão lá no chat, aí eu tentei pegar umas perguntas, tá? Então eu vou ler para você, qualquer coisa eu vou parafraseando para te ajudar, porque é meio longa. So, Daniel Ferraz. There is a movement by Brazilian scholars in which multiliteracies have been criticized for not responding to Brazilian realities. Paradoxically, multiliteracies as digitally have been one of main literacies within the literacies field. Do you see a way out? do we need other terms for the conversation or see multiliteracies made in Brazil?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I don't know if I'm able to respond, but then again, I'll share some of my first thoughts here. Well, first of all, I think it's important for me to also clarify that I'm not against coining new terms. New terms are necessary. New terms are part of scientific knowledge. New terms come as a response to new social demands and the like. But probably, yes, I agree that there is this reframing of the notion of multiliteracies nowadays being discussed by some colleagues here in Brazil. And if we need a new term, that I don't know, and probably not. But what we need is to change the terms of the conversation, not changing the terms once again, but changing the terms of the conversation. And probably, Danielle, the way out is actually paradoxically, we have to find ways within the theories, taking the new criticisms from the inside out. I take as an example the body of knowledge that has been produced so consistently throughout the last 10 years with Projeto Nacional Novos Letramentos, carried out by Valkyria and Limario. And I think it's important that we place ourselves in this self-critique exercise in which from the inside out, we establish these connections, comparisons, contrasts to different theorizations from the past, from more recent times. So my invitation in my talk today is actually to retrieve good stuff that has been produced in Brazil with Paulo Freire. And so decolonial thinking actually, this is a lesson from decolonial thinking, as they tell us to look back to the past and learn from the past and retrieve what is good. So probably now it's time for us in Brazil to reframe and reflect back and forth in order to identify limitations and always in accordance with our local realities. Yes, it's something that, well, it's a great question, and that's what occurs to me right now. I don't know if you want to compliment Alessandra or Alison.
Ana Paula, your answers are always great, okay? And the question was made for you. But anyway, Danielle, I think that this research is very relevant. We have always to be trying to respond to theories. As time goes by, we cannot get stuck, okay, to the way theory was produced, to the way we first interpreted theory. We have always to be revisiting, reinterpreting. And I think that we are always reinterpreting anyway, even if we don't mean to, okay? Because no one is ever going to really interpret and put multiliteracies into use, maybe the way it was planned or supposed to be. So our practices are already interpretations and of the theory. And I think this is a process, that's why I like your question so much. This is a process that has to be motivated. Okay, we have to keep thinking. We have to keep thinking if the theory makes sense, if the practice makes sense. Here in Brazil, we have been reading a lot, aren't we, Ana Paula, about Boaventura de Souza Santos, decolonial authors. And of course, all this is affecting, okay? And not only this, as I mentioned in my talk, for example, the research on translingualism, the research on multilingualism, all this together is the way we are reinterpreting multiliteracies, because we cannot see multiliteracies dissociated from the body, as Ana Paula said, or dissociated from migration. And so I think the only sane way to move on critically with any theory is constantly reinterpreting it. Basically this.
Ana, o Daniel fez um follow-up e aí ele disse assim, ó, the body. I think the body is more present in elementary education. My mom was a pedagogue and I was amazed to see children using their learning bodies. And as many scholars have shown, the body is left out in higher education. And I agree, a gente promove uma higienização das pessoas quando elas chegam na sala de aula para o ensino superior, sabe? E dá um sentimento de decepção quando você vê que você participou disso, sabe? So maybe, I don't know if you want to respond to what he said.
Yes, I do. Maravilha, Daniel, de follow-up. Sim, e eu tendo a acreditar aí que, lamentavelmente, nós também temos perdido essa importância do corpo, né, e da multissensorialidade até na educação infantil e no Fundamental 1, na medida em que há um grave encurtamento da infância com esses processos de alfabetização e letramento cada vez mais precoces, que querem, enfim, colocar um lápis na mão da criança pequena e querem já corpos dóceis, disciplinados, e é uma pena. Quer dizer, a gente tem que resgatar esse corpo e essa multissensorialidade para os anos finais deste currículo, mas também já resgatar na educação infantil. Eu acho que esse é um ponto. E talvez a tecnologia, as novas tecnologias, sejam um ponto para a gente poder falar sobre isso. E não para trazer mais exercícios num neobehaviorismo para essas crianças agora na pandemia, sobretudo as que estão recebendo atividades online. Tem bebê de 2 anos tendo que imitar a coreografia da professora, que agora está em 2D, achatada na tela. Então, quer dizer, a gente precisa usar da tecnologia, na verdade, para desconstruir essas práticas ainda logocêntricas que estão chegando via tecnologia, mas que não deixam de ser logocêntricas, né? E eu acho que é um papel também nosso, da educação, da pesquisa, a gente falar sobre essas questões e poder resgatar essa multissensorialidade, essa questão corporal, afetiva, enfim. Mas sim.
Ana, vou te fazer uma pergunta sobre isso que você acabou de comentar. Como, assim, eu vejo que a gente precisa manter esse diálogo, essa conversa, porque o impacto que a educação como um todo está passando agora por causa da pandemia vai maximizar esses efeitos que você comentou. Como que existe uma maneira da gente make sure que nós vamos conseguir realmente impedir que os efeitos dessa prática da educação linguística ocorrendo digitalmente não permaneçam no nosso pós-pandemia? O que a gente faz como educador, como pesquisador, como professor?
Eu acho que nesse momento a gente está vivendo esse boom de ensino remoto, emergencial, essa proliferação de atividades online. E eu repito, Alisson, o meu argumento de que não é uma lógica do ou isso ou aquilo, mas é uma lógica do e isso e aquilo. Acho que a gente precisa achar um equilíbrio. Há muita coisa boa nas novas tecnologias, mas a educação linguística, especificamente, ela talvez o professor de línguas possa pensar em atividades que façam jus à multimodalidade, que façam jus à exploração daquilo que está at hand, daquilo que está disponível, por exemplo, à criança, ao adolescente, ou daquilo que não está, então que essa aula possa fazer uma reflexão crítica acerca dessa lacuna, acerca dessa falta, mas eu acho que por meio das novas tecnologias a gente pode pensar em mudar os termos da conversa que está chegando por meio dessas atividades online, né? Esse é um ponto. se uma das dimensões pedagógicas prevista na pedagogia dos multiletramentos é a prática situada, isso também não é novo, porque Paulo Freire sempre colocou à frente a importância do contexto e desse sujeito inscrito no mundo. Então, o professor de línguas pode também, talvez, convidar essa criança, esse adolescente a olhar para o seu redor e a pensar multissensorialmente os sentidos que poderão ser construídos dali, os conhecimentos que poderão ser construídos a partir dali. Dá trabalho, talvez a gente, dá trabalho porque a gente não sabe como fazer. A gente perdeu a mão, como o Daniel disse aí, o currículo ficou cada vez mais logocêntrico, menos criativo, menos multimodal. E a gente precisa, talvez, resgatar essa multimodalidade que não vem só na tela, mas que está aqui, cada um tem a sua multimodalidade, a depender dos recursos de que dispõe ali. E acho que é um ponto que a gente precisa de outra live, de outra sessão, de muitas sessões, para a gente poder coletivamente pensarmos aí.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ana Paula. Ale, você quer comentar algo sobre o que a Ana disse ou você quer ir para a próxima pergunta? O que você gostaria?
Pelo adiantado da hora, acho que a gente pode prosseguir. E a resposta foi muito clara.
Ale, it's a question from Professor Clarissa. It's a very long question. I don't know if you can see the Q&A button on Zoom. Can you see it?
I have seen this question. Yes, it's a long question.
It's a long question. So
there are a series of questions, actually.
Yes. So the question from Clarissa is the first one. It's a very good question.
Okay.
So she's saying, Alessandra, thanks for this beautiful, critical, and clear presentation. You posed a lot of questions for us, so I'd like to hear your comments on some of your answers to some of the questions you made me wonder about. What do you think is the role of formal education in contemporary society?
Let's go one by one, otherwise I forget.
Okay.
Okay. I think that formal education will always have a role in education, okay? But the problem for me now is that how inclusive is it in terms of diversity? If it keeps insisting on the canon, how is it open to students, what students can add, what students can say, what students would like to discuss at school? Okay, so if we insist in formal education, we diminish the space for very important discussions. They maybe are not having any place at school. And I would say that one of this has to do with the discussion of diversity, okay, and of language learning and of identity. Okay, with all this contact with, as we mentioned before, with different cultures, languages, people, how is school bringing these discussions into their classes, or are they still stuck in specific pieces of knowledge separated and put into boxes? And each teacher will have the same amount of boxes, okay, they had before to teach this year, but this year has many other things going on that would need space in the classroom. So my point is, there is room for formal education, but it cannot only take the whole place. It cannot take the whole place. It has to open space for diversity. It has to open space for difference, because when you bring difference into the class, different opinions, different conceptions, different ideas, this is when you have a good opportunity to exercise, okay, respect, to exercise citizenship, to exercise ethics. And so that's That's what I would say so far. We need a more inclusive education. And I don't think formal education does the job by itself.
And then she continued, and she basically she asked two questions. She says that she's intrigued by how students are not critical already. If they don't have a voice already. Because when we say that we are giving them a voice, we're implying that they don't have a voice. So
we can
it's
interpret it that way. Yes, it could be a perfect interpretation. But I think that it's excellent that Clarissa brought these issues, because then maybe things that were not very clear have a chance, at least a chance, to become a little bit more clear. I think, Alison, where is you changed the question? Just the idea of critical. Okay.
Yeah.
No, students don't depend on us to be critical, and I can tell you this from the 17, 18-year-old students I get, okay, in the first year of Letras here at UFPR. The kind of ideas they can put together, the connections they make, sometimes go much beyond the connections I myself make. But my point is, we need everything we need to exercise. And we even have to exercise being critical, because sometimes some people understand being critical as defending their perspective. And this is not in the direction that I think that we need in a world that's so unequal as ours, okay? So I think that we have to have our perspectives, our opinions, but we may be open to change if the other argument is ethical, okay, and comes to make sense to us. So we may change perspective, we may make other kinds of connections. So when I say that we need to open space to exercise students' criticism, it's in this sense. Of course they are, because life is the biggest school. Okay, experiences, everything we live in our families, with our friends, with the things we read. These are the resources for us to develop critical thinking. In class, I think we can promote this. We can open space for this. This is my point of view on this second or third question Clarissa asked.
Thank you so much, Alice. Ana Paula, there is a question from Diego here on the Q&A, Diego Sátiro or Satiro. He asks, how to differ delinking, decolonizing, and discolonizing, term coined used by Paulo Freire?
Okay, wow, Diego, that's a good, big question. Let me see if I'm able to respond. Well, I see decolonial and descolonizar. I see the prefix decolonial without an S is an attempt to demonstrate and to discuss that actually there's no way back when it comes to the negative impacts of colonial times. So the decolonial thinking actually is an attempt to establish a new critique on the coloniality of power, of coloniality of the being, in which certain strategies are put at stake. One of them is delinking and epistemic disobedience, as Mignolo addressed. Delinking or desprendimento, I see it, the way I see it, is that one of the strategies that is part of the decolonial thinking. Delinking is not a synonym of decoloniality. So decoloniality is this umbrella term that to me is a way of thinking and thinking otherwise. Delinking or desprendimento would be one of the strategies that one might apply in the endeavor of decolonizing praxis. Was that the question? Delinking and decolonizing, Alison?
Yes. Yes, it was. So I think we answered all the questions. I went back to YouTube and then I asked if there were any last questions because I had missed part of the discussion that went on there. Clarissa said chorinho time. So it's time for our concluding remarks, let's say, also because of the time. So I'll go following the order of the presentation. I'll go for Alessandra, for Ale first, for your final remarks. Maybe you can say anything that you want, okay? Then I'll go for Ana Paula.
All right. So my final remarks are just to thank everybody that was here, okay, watching us, asking us questions, making us reflect even more about what we have said during our talk in relation to interpreting our colleagues' talk as well. For me, this was a very, as all the other ones before have also been, this session has been very fruitful. I have learned a lot with Ana Paula. I have learned a lot with the questions. They made me reflect, and they will keep me reflecting about everything that we discussed here today. So I can only thank everybody and Ana Paula, okay, for the moment we have just shared. That's it.
Thank you, Alessandra. So, Ana, you are spotlighted.
Yes.
Okay.
Also, I want to thank Alison, Rosani again for this invitation, and also Alessandra for sharing this time with me. As my talk pretty much looked back to the place of multiliteracies in society and in the human being, and as decolonial thinking invites us to look back, but also look sideways, as we've learned from Limario. So my new invitation is actually to look sideways along with my colleagues that have been investigating for such a long time, new literacies, multiliteracies, critical literacies, and the like, so that we can, if that is of relevance, change the terms of the conversation and once again reframe the concept along with the needs and the social demands that are true and that are part of our lives here in Brazil. So actually, my invitation is that we keep talking about this, and I would love to hear from all the participants of this moment, this session, so we might actually reflect further on the issues that have been raised today. Thank you so much. It was an honor.
Thank you, Ana Paula. Thank you, Alessandra. I think this was an inspiring session. It will be available on YouTube. So if you want to watch it again, maybe if somebody missed it and would like to watch it, it's going to be available on the PPGE YouTube. Certificates will be emailed to everyone who enrolled and attended the session. So maybe from 5 to 10 days. We will be back on September the 9th with a talk about interculturality and internationalization with Professor Thelma Jimenez, Kyria Finardi, and Denise de Abreu. I will be in the session, but I will not moderate it. Rosani will be the moderator. Rosani, did I forget to say anything that maybe you would like me to? No? Your mic is off.
I just want to thank our guests and the audience. It was a brilliant session. It was very inspiring. And many people, or a few people here have asked both our presenters to share their references again. So maybe we can end with both of you showing the reference list, because I think it was very quick. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Anne.
So everyone, thank you so much for the participation. Thank you so much for the questions. Ana and Alessandra, you are very close. You are very dear to my heart. Alessandra was before, but now Ana is too after the session. So thank you, everyone. So decolonizing, delinking, and we will be back on the 9th. That's it. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.